Your buyer bought you because you had a very niche target market, correct? Talk a little bit about that and where your niche was, where it matches theirs, and why that was so important, getting a higher EBITDA.
Yeah, so I've always been, 95% in the legal space, fully vertical legal space. It's where I became the trusted expert advisor to everyone, and it worked out very well. As Robin says, you can always make sure you can get your value, your full value, if you are the expert in that field. And I've always was that. And so when the company came in and they saw what I'm doing and how they're doing it, and they were also in a similar kind of space, it just was a logical, natural synergy in that. And also it helped the multiples tremendously because of being vertical in that space. I got a much higher multiple than what I've been hearing talked about now.
Yep. So a lot of people, and probably they come to you, or that the expectation of what the value of the company is actually worth, right? We all wish our company was worth $100 million, right? But a lot of times people come and their evaluation of what they think it's worth and what it's really worth is two different things. How did that line up when you guys sold? I mean, I know you guys were going through Robin, Greg Crabtree and stuff, so you sort of had a good number. But how can you help people set the expectation on the evaluation portion?
I think when you run your books in your company, if it's run properly, you're not milking it for private expenses and personal expenses, and you've got everything set up correctly. When you do get to that stage where they're really looking into your books and they see that everything is above board and in order, and not having to figure out that somebody was draining money somewhere else out of the business, and they look back over a few-year period and they can see that earnings is consistent and the clients are consistent and the revenue. I heard somebody say before, you only get like 14 cents on the dollar for hardware revenue. I get full because I'm consistent in my margins. I had great margins in hardware and even software licensing and things like that. If you're consistent with that, you're going to get paid a better value on that. So that's was for me.
I agree. You have to keep your books straight for multiple years, or at least be able to point where the expenses go, if it's for personal or you have your own car through the company. As long as you can categorize them and put them in proper order, then your books are good. And a lot of training we had here. We're talking about it. You, Will, specifically Robin. So I pretty much knew from the table that how much I'm going to get, my expectation. And the fact that I had 3 companies, I was able to negotiate and get one over what I should have normally get, the multiples.
Yeah, for me, I think there's a lot of conversation around multiples, right? And people hear these high double-digit multiples that are out there. For me, I talked to a lot of different people, like, hey, if my EBITDA is here, what's the range? If my EBITDA is here, what's the range? And so on and so forth. And then I know when Rob Schenk and I did our merger back in 2021, we actually hired an outside firm. It's like, hey, we'll pay X amount of thousands of dollars. Look at all of our books, run through it like it was a transaction. Tell us what you think each of us is worth, and then what we're worth together, and then come up with that number. So we got a bit of a third-party, insight into what someone else thinks our business is worth versus us just saying, hey, it's worth $100 million.
David, you mentioned something about running personal expenses through the business. Let's talk about not treating your company like a piggy bank, right? What does the owners here need to prep themselves with in cleaning their books up when it comes to that?
Well, I mean, obviously, if you have a card that you use it mostly for the company, that, to me, that's something you can run through the company. But yeah, you don't want your groceries to be on the company and your personal expenses to be on the company. You want to keep it clean. But obviously, there's a fine line between personal business and the company business. And just make sure that line is not crossed.
For me, it's talking about also making sure you're taking reasonable compensation out of the business. That, I hear a lot of people when we talk on these calls, only taking $100,000, $150,000 out of the business a year. I guess it depends on what levels you're at. And then, if you then want to increase yourself to a higher salary and more, that actually comes off your EBITDA. So you got to make yourself, you're paying yourself a reasonable compensation. What is ownership role versus developing the business kind of role and things like that, and that can affect your valuation as well. So we just got to, it's a fine line there between paying yourself and what's reasonable and what that valuation will get back on that numbers.
And the definition of reasonable is not so reasonable either, right? You get a CPA to tell you one thing, the IRS probably will tell you something different. You get some PE firm that might tell you. Tom, what do you think is reasonable in your opinion?
Yeah, for me, I ran a lot of expenses through the business, right? I think the question is, if we sell the business, then would I still run those things through the company after the sale? Or would someone say, hey, why am I paying your home internet? Or why am I paying your cell phone bills? Am I going to get questions like that? So I tried to use my best judgment to say, all right, with all these different expenses that I had, I took all those and I moved them out of my P&L to the bottom into other expenses category. And I was able to just kind of make that my bucket of questionable, gray area expenses, let's call it. And so then I could see what my profitability was on the top part of the P&L, and I could present that to different people and say, hey, here's how the business runs. Here's the stuff that I don't think you need, but I'm pushing through the business anyways, currently as a current owner. And it made it easier to get to a true EBITDA number versus trying to pull all this stuff out and say, oh, well, that's an add back, and that's an add back, and that's an add back. And you get into those kind of conversations, there's a lot of negotiation that happens, right? If I claim that X amount of expenses are add backs, then people question it quite a bit.